Welcome to the Harlan Cohn podcast. I've never called it the Harlan Cohn podcast before, Ethan. Isn't that funny? It's
It is
weird.
funny.
Use your name. So you're the college essay guy. We'll get into who the college essay guy is in a second, but I mean, like on your birth certificate, does it say the college essay guy?
No one says I want to be the college essay guy when I grow up.
But
So
that's not your real name. What is your real name?
my real name is Ethan. A lot of folks don't know my middle name, but it's Lyon, Lyon Sawyer. And I think I can say that without any fear of like my identity being stolen. But if my identity gets stolen, we'll come back and delete it.
It's already been stolen. And little do you know, my TV, you bought it for me.
I
It's
hope you
beautiful.
enjoy.
And Netflix, you pay for my Netflix and Disney Plus. Somehow your card didn't go through for the Disney Plus. I don't understand what's going on.
If you just email me, we'll get that taken care of.
Right. It's perfect. So today I have the pleasure of visiting with Ethan Lyon Sawyer, the college essay guy. And Ethan and I go way back, and I just get a smile. I just have like a good feeling when I talk to Ethan, because Ethan is really someone who wants to help students to reach their potential. And his life and his story and who he is someone that really I get why you do this and how your life experiences have informed you. So, Ethan, will you please help us to understand just a little bit about who you are, not just what you do, um, going back to, little boy Ethan and some of those life experiences that led you here today?
Yeah. Let me give you like let's do like the 90-second version so that I spare folks like the hour-long version. But I grew up moving around a ton. My parents, I went to 13 schools. We moved 20 times, and I had to figure out how to get good at meeting people fast. And so I think I also got really tired of like small talk. And I was kind of like, look, we got to get this going because I'm getting ready to leave, basically. And when I got into writing, and in college, I studied screenwriting. And I think it was that combination of things, asking questions, writing, screenwriting, that when I graduated college led me to get a job helping students write college essays. I'd been told before I went to Northwestern that, my essays helped get me in. And so I think that kind of planted a seed too. But it wasn't until I was like a year or so into a counseling program that I started to see how deep the work of writing your personal narrative can be, and how it feels like to me, under the right circumstances and given the right amount of time, can be a kind of modern rite of passage, because I feel like our culture is kind of devoid of these rites of passage. And so as students, as I've sort of deepened this over the last 20 years or so, I think that one of the things we've been able to do at CEG, which is like College Essay Guy, is put together resources, free resources mostly, for helping students connect more deeply with themselves. And then for counselors and parents who are like helping students connecting more deeply with one another. And that's what I feel like deeply committed to, Harlan. And that's when I'm in conversation with you, or when I'm meeting somebody or meeting a student, it's like, how can we connect in a way that feels like, how can we create psychological safety for one another so that we can like learn more about ourselves and our world together?
Yeah. I'm excited to learn about the personal statement. I'm excited to just understand what it is, the purpose of it, how somebody even takes the first step to approach this. But a question I get a lot, Ethan, is how can someone meet other people? Like, I have a lot of advice on how you can make friends and meet people. And one of the things I tell students when they're in a new environment, or really anyone who's in a new job, anyone who's in a social situation, is you need to know your story. Like, what's your
Mm.
story? Like, what's your short little story? If you were to share that story with someone you're meeting, and there's context to that story. But do you have like a little story? Do you have like a 2 or 3 sentence story that's Ethan's story?
Actually, as you say, how to meet people, I realize that my tactic, my trick, Harlan, is not talking about myself. It's asking, I mentioned this, asking great questions. I'll do that. I'll share the Ethan story in 2 to 3 sentences in just a second. But like, it reminds me of, I had this friend in my counseling program who was having trouble meeting people. And I was like, well, what kind of questions do you ask? Have we talked about this?
No.
I was like, what kind of questions are you asking? He's like, I ask him like, what do you do for work? And, what, how, what's, he'll talk about the weather and stuff. I was like, you need better questions. So we created this Google Doc, and it was called Questions to Ask Strangers at Parties. And it was a huge list of maybe like 120 questions. And then eventually I was like, oh, this would make a cool blog. So we published this list of what we called brave and interesting questions. And within like a month, we were ranking as like number 3 on Google for interesting questions. And so if folks Google this, if you Google interesting questions or interesting questions college essay guy, you'll see a list of what we call brave and interesting questions. And I wouldn't suggest like use all of them with every person you meet, but it can give you a cool set of like back of your mind questions when you're trying to get to know somebody. And if I was to like answer your question, which is like, what's Ethan's story? I think I would probably use the question stem if you really knew me. So if you really knew me, Ethan, you would know, for example, that my growing up moving around a lot helped me gain the superpower of getting to know folks quickly and getting to like connect with just about anybody, but also bred in me a fear of intimacy and getting too close. And this was in my, friendships and also in my romantic relationships, such that I would like break up with my college girlfriend on the academic cycle. And it took a little bit of self, interrogation and, therapy from my friends mostly to realize that I was in this pattern of like, not getting too close. And I think it's still sort of with me today. But if I had to give it like the 2 to 3 sentence version, it's like good at getting close, but not too close. But I'm working on it, would be something like it.
I love that. I mean, I think that honesty of just looking in the mirror and reflecting and getting to a deeper place of just understanding, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, I've been working on that a lot, and it's taken me a while to get brave enough to really acknowledge just how afraid I am when it comes to experiencing pain. Like I've been just going through, I have a therapist, and I love therapy, and I'm really good at making people laugh, and I'm really good at deflecting conversations, and I'm really good at making people feel good. But what I've recognized is just how afraid I am of pain. And I'm an expert on rejection, because rejection is really, I think, the most stinging pain that we experience and the most deeply personal. So it's understanding it, but then it's also acknowledging it and processing it and giving myself the space to feel it and cope with it in healthy ways.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like pain. This pain is such a beautiful place to begin our conversation, which is such a funny way to start it. It's a good first sentence of an essay, but it really is, because it's a real feeling. And I think when it comes to the college process, there aren't a lot of real feelings. It's very technical, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, and there's a process, there's acronyms, and it's deeply impersonal in many ways. So I want to understand what the role of the personal statement is, or the essay, or whatever that is. So before we do that, because you're also an admissions expert, can you just give us like a quick umbrella look at, okay, what are the components of admissions? And then where does this whole essay, supplemental essay, personal statement, whatever you want to call it, how does that fit in?
Totally. So zooming back, if I had to put it into a sentence, what are colleges looking for? They want to know what are the skills, qualities, values, and interests that you're going to bring to the college community. And that's what they're assessing. And you're showing this through a few different parts of the application. The main thing that they're going to be looking for in terms of like, their academic institutions is going to be not just your grades, but the rigor of courses that you took. And when colleges are surveyed each year, they're like, this is what we care about most. It used to be that what they care about second most was standardized tests. But with the big test optional and test blind movement, that's dropped. Now, colleges don't necessarily look at that next. Some colleges do. There are very few that require tests, but most have moved away from that. So the next thing they're looking at is, and I'll just put a bunch of things in no particular order, but they're looking at things like, what has been your extracurricular involvement in terms of other things that you're involved, that you're connected with? What do your teacher recommendations say? What do your counselor recommendations? In other words, what do people say about you? Another thing that they look at a lot is essays, your essays and your, your story or your stories that you want to tell for the application, depending on what school you're applying to. And then underneath that are a bunch of other intangibles, but things like demonstrated interest, like certain small schools care about, are you likely to enroll or not? And there are certain ways that you can demonstrate that. Did you interview, for example? But those are kind of minor concerns. So I would say it's the big one is grades and how hard your courses were, and then sort of all these other, mid-level concerns. I would put them. And I would say in that sort of mid-level, the mid-level concerns, a lot of those things aren't going to be make or break, but I think grades can be make or break. And if anybody's getting stressed listening to this already, I just want to say that like most colleges in the United States accept most students. In fact, the average acceptance rate is about 68%. So before you go like, and start freaking out, I just want you to know that there are awesome schools out there for you. And it's really just a matter of research to find some of those awesome schools.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the reminder. Because I know that, just thinking about grades, people get so caught up and so worried, and they want to be wanted, but there's so many schools that will want you. And I preach this all the time. It's not the school, it's the student. It's what you do when you're there. There's proof, challenge, success. Denise Pope has mentioned this a lot, and we've seen this through Frank Bruni. And just a reminder, it really is not about the school. And we've seen this. It's really about what happens when a student is there. Right. So for a student who's looking at college, and you've got a wide range. I work a lot with first generation students who look at this and they don't know where to start. And then you have other students who have lots of resources and families who have gone to college and been thinking about college since kindergarten. So what I'm trying to do, and hopefully we can do this, is no matter where someone is, how do they even know what a school wants, and how do they know how to start doing the work and when to start doing the work? So in terms of the essay piece, does every school require students to write a personal statement?
Great question to start off. No, the answer is no. I would say that depending on oftentimes how selective the school is, so like the more selective the school is, the more likely they are to require an essay, and the more likely they are to require what are called supplemental essays. So I'll just give you an example. If you're applying to USC, University of Southern California, they're not only going to require a personal statement, aka the college essay, which is going to be about 650 words. It's about a page, and it's going to be about your values, and it's going to show your personality, what you care about, what you're interested in. And then separate from that, they're going to include other questions like, hey, why do you want to go to USC? Give us some short answers so that we can kind of get to know you a little better. But if you're talking about a school like Penn State, for example, Penn State's a little bit less selective. They might ask for an essay, but what they're really looking at as your grades. And I say this because I talked to Penn State about this, recently. And the admission officer is like, you know what? It's not as important for us, the essay. Then you've got schools that aren't going to require essays at all. Cal State, for example, if you go to a Cal State school, they're looking at, your grades, maybe your, not your scores for Cal States, but they're looking at your, your grades basically. And if you've got the grades, you're in. If not, not so much. And so some schools don't require them at all. So I would say worry about it more for those schools that are more selective. Why is that? Those schools that are like a USC or, Penn, for example, they're getting tons and tons of students with not just 4.0 GPAs, 4.8 GPAs. They've got all the extracurriculars, the great rec letters, all the things. And they're like, how do I tell this student from this student? And it starts to get into some of those particularities of like their personal statement and their supplemental essays where they can start to differentiate. So the short, I guess, longer answer is like essays matter more for differentiating students who have similar profiles.
So I know there are listeners who are thinking, okay, well, my GPA is not at the same caliber as so many of these applicants. Is there a way that I could get someone to review my application and look past the grades and start with my essay? Or if the grade isn't high enough, are they not even going to look at your essay? Like, how can you wow them? Can you kind of find some ways? Because the other piece is, due to COVID, due to so many of the emotional health challenges that students have faced, there are a lot of students who didn't perform at the level that they're truly capable of performing. So how does someone approach that?
Well, I think that this ends up becoming stress making when students are defining their success in this process based on whether or not they get into a highly selective school. So let me say that in a slightly different way. If you've got a 3.0 GPA and you're like, I got to get into Stanford, I think this is going to be a really stressful process for you, because it's I won't say impossible, but it's almost impossible to get into Stanford in general, with a less than 5% acceptance rate, and then take out athletes and legacy, and it's, let's call it 2%. And then with the 3.0, they've just got so many students around the world that they're choosing from. So there's there's a stress reliever here. And it's, if you can expand your definition of what success looks like. So this is a place to start, is go, how am I going to define success in this college admission process? And I think this is a really good one for parents too, to go, how are we going to define success as a family? Is it getting into Berkeley? Or is it actually, hey, I want to make sure that I turn in my applications on time, that I've set aside time on the weekends or whatever it is to work on this, that I've engaged with some kind of, we've got pay what you can courses, for example, some kind of resources to help me understand how this thing works. And I feel at the end of the day, like, you know what, I really gave it my best. And then it's up to the reader and the application reader to make the decision. Some of that might also include doing research to make sure that you're, applying to a wide range of schools. Because I find that's one of the biggest stress reducers, is like making sure that you're applying to what we call a balanced list of schools. So not just highly selectives, but schools that, as one book title called it, 8 first choices. Can you find 8 or 10 first choice schools that, 6 of which you've got a good chance of getting into? Suddenly, anxiety goes down, because it's like, oh, you know what? I do have a chance of getting into some of these schools. And then you can focus back on where I think your energy is best spent, which is in digging deep and figuring out what are the parts of yourself that you want to show. And then again, defining success not by the outcome or what someone else thinks, but did you do your best, and defining that for yourself.
Yeah. So what I'm getting from you is, before you even put pen to paper, if people are even using a pen or fingers to a keyboard, it's the mindset.
Totally.
It's like you got to get in a certain mindset, because if you're in a scarcity mindset, if you're in this fear mindset, it's really hard to dig deep and channel what it is you want to share. Would you say that's accurate?
Totally. And it starts with like the essay prompts. So take the Common App essay prompts, for example. So the essay, what we call the personal statement, the college essay, has certain prompts, and there are 7 of them. And one of them is topic of your choice. Students sometimes overly obsess about the prompts because they've been told to in English class. What I want to encourage students to do is start with some great brainstorming exercises that are going to get you to get creative and thinking about experiences in your life that might make for a great story. And start from within, start from you rather than what you think they want, because it's impossible to try and guess what they want, especially like every single admission officer at every school you're going to be applying to, whom you've never met before. Start instead with thinking about, okay, how do I get in and figure out my skills, qualities, values, and interests that I want to show? That's a much more empowered place, and I think a stronger and actually less anxious making place to start from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And when you go through this process with students, and I know you have programs, what's your program that you teach over the summer?
Yeah, so we've got a few different ones, but one of them is, there's a live course that we teach over the summer, but it's available. Folks can watch recordings anytime. But essentially, we have a 4-week program that allows students to figure out their personal statement topic, brainstorm ideas, pick a topic, try different things, fail, try again. Here's something that works. And then, lots of tips for outlining, structuring, and revising, so that by the end of the month, they've got something that they feel like, okay, this is workable. And then we transition into 4 more weeks. So it's, done over the whole summer, where students can figure out, okay, based on this being my personal statement story, what are the other parts of my application? What does my activities list reveal about me? What is my additional information section? So another component of the application is colleges ask basically, what else do you want us to know about you? And students are often like, oh my gosh, what do you mean? Like, what else is important there? So we get really specific about stuff that you can put in there to help give context for who you are, what your application is about. And then we get into dozens of, supplemental essays that students need to write. So that my hope for students, and this gets into timeline a little bit, is by the end of the summer, you would have a pretty good sense of, okay, these are my applications for, and this is what it looks like. This is the scope of it. If somebody's listening to this at the end of the summer, it's not too late. Okay. Most students don't really get started on these until like September, October. It's fine to do that. It just might mean that you're doing it while you're doing some of these other things, your extracurricular activities, your, biggest course load, et cetera. So I really encourage students, especially like rising seniors, to think about making time for this over the summer, because I can't stress how important it is, how busy that fall senior year is going to be as it is for many students.
Yeah. When you're talking about the Common App and the 7 different prompts, and I know that some people might just know what those are, and like what is a prompt? What are the 7 different prompts? Do you have to write all of the 7 prompts? Do you
Good
pick
question.
one?
Yeah, and it's funny. Here's what I would say about the prompts is, like, folks can Google them if they want, but I would say it's more important to do brainstorming exercises. And I'll give you a couple examples in a second. Tell your story first, and then just pick whichever prompt it connects with for your personal statement. For your supplemental essays, those are often very specific, and it is really important to answer the prompt in those. And I know this is confusing, and it's like, well, how would I know that? Well, good thing you're listening to this podcast, I guess. But in terms of the personal statement, I just find that thinking, for example, about your core values, there's an exercise that we can link in the show notes on that. Thinking about I say that there are like 8 different types of essays that you can write. Doing brainstorming that can help you generate ideas around those. And knowing that it doesn't necessarily have to be about your deepest, darkest challenge, because I think a lot of students kind of skew towards that. And let me say, I want to actually, if we've got time, I want to talk a little bit about writing about mental health issues, because I think students often ask, should I disclose mental health challenges? But broadly speaking, I want to say you don't have to go deep and dark to write a great story. You can go broad. You can, think about breadth and think about giving lots of different color and variety in your essay. That can be a nice, lighter way to show who you are than just thinking about what's the hardest thing I've been through and how do I make it seem like it was really hard and like I've really been through a struggle. Because while struggles are important and I think they shape us, you don't have to let them dominate your personal statement. You can weave them into a paragraph, for example. You can share them in your additional information section and use your personal statement to tell some other story about, different identities that you possess, for example.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. And it's like, if I'm wanting to write my personal statement, I mean, I'm going to want to include some drama, right? Like I'm going to want to have conflict. I'm going to want to have something, maybe a little bit dark, a moment of discovery. So, it's like, how could you write something that doesn't go deep and still impact someone in a deep way?
Great question. And I think that I'll give you an example. One student wrote about their different identities. So this student was Chinese, Catholic, Mexican, and each paragraph began with a different phrase. I am Chinese, I am Mexican, I am Catholic. And each paragraph showed what it was like being Chinese for the student. What were the details, the moments? And each one came with certain challenges. So in this particular student faced some, social pressures within the family to get good grades, for example. Or, in his Mexican identity, he felt the need to be able to endure spicy foods, And so there are these little mini challenges. So there are these little mini dramas, we'll call them. The biggest one I would say came in the Catholic paragraph, where the student says, I have this thing that I believe in, but I also question what I believe in. So any of these challenges could have dominated the essay. It could have been this whole essay is about questioning religion, or dealing with my parents' struggle and pressuring me to become a doctor, as the student literally says. But instead, the student's like, here's this identity, but that's not all of who I am. Here's this other identity, but that's not all of who I am. But each one comes with its challenges. Also, I think students feel like they need to resolve the challenge. For example, this struggle between, do I, lean into faith and religion, or do I lean away from it because it's sometimes confusing and hard? The student was clearly still wrestling with that. It's okay to have these things that you're struggling with and to name them without necessarily tying them up in a neat little bow. So the tactical specific thing that I'll say is, like, you can mention these things and, relate them as like aspects of who you are and things that you're thinking about, problems that you're working on, without feeling like you have to, be a hero in every single moment in your story, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be a hero. Like I want to make someone cry. I want to make someone laugh. I want to like move someone. But I love the example. I love the example you used, which is awesome. What should I hate asking a should question. I'm not a big should have person, but if someone's approaching this personal statement, where's a place they shouldn't start? Do you have a few places to avoid?
Totally. So I just did a YouTube video on this. So I've got the bullet points in my head. I say that to be a little more transparent. But the top three, I would say, don't go there's. Number one, I think that a lot of students. Now, let me just follow this up. That I hope that we have a minute to say where you should go, so that people don't feel just
Absolutely,
like,
that's
because what I'm about to do for a good portion of the audience, students especially, I'm going to shoot down some ideas that you were thinking about writing about potentially. So there are sort of the classics. The classics are writing about a common sport or extracurricular activity. So writing about football, basketball, volleyball, violin, any of these common sport, piano. I've been doing this for years and it's shaped who I am. Golf. I wouldn't write about that. A couple reasons. One, it's going to blend in. It's going to put the reader into skimming mode, and they're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, great, another basketball essay." Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, these are all common things. Also, some schools are going to ask you about those things, and you've got opportunities to write about them in the activities list and your supplemental essays. So that's one. Two is the mission trip essay, which became less popular during COVID, but it's the going, being a person of privilege, going to a place where folks were relatively less privileged and realizing basically how privileged you are and how much you have to be grateful for, or that poor people are actually can be happy. And that's sort of like, it's just bad on lots of levels. A third one is like the big performance or the big game essay. So the big performance essay goes something like, I was waiting backstage to give the speech, do the dance, etc. And then I was, hands were sweaty and I didn't know if I could do it, but I did it and I gained confidence.
It's great.
And you're kind of like, great. Or the big game essay where it's like, we're down by 2 runs, bottom of the ninth, or down by 1 touchdown, end of the fourth quarter. And then one of 2 endings, we either win the game, yay, or we lose the game, but we learn a valuable lesson. Related to this one is like the sports injury essay, which is like, the students participating in the sport breaks, pops, snaps something, and then surprise, they don't actually end up going back to the team, but they end up getting involved as the manager of the team, and they end up supporting the team in this way they didn't at all expect. So these are sort of like 4 of like the greatest hits. But I will say I'm going to add one to this one now, Harlan, and I want to talk a little bit about mental health for just a second, because it's been a thing that as I've talked to admission officers lately and asked, what are your most common topics? Both high school counselors and admission officers are saying so many students are writing about anxiety and depression. Now, quick pause and side note, and I want to say that like for students who are struggling with mental health challenges, I know you talk about this a lot, Harlan, but in the show notes, I want to share some resources and say, as somebody who's like a super fan of talking to people in therapy, I think, Harlan, we share this, like talk to somebody. And it could, if it's a parent, a counselor, somebody, like there is a way out, there is support for you. And I feel kind of trite doing that as kind of like an aside, but I feel like if we just skipped over that and I didn't say that, it's reaching out for support isn't, cowardly. It's a sign of bravery. So quick side note on that. If you're considering writing about mental health challenges, I want to let you know that a lot of students are writing about this. And college admission, imagine you're a college admission reader and you've read your 30th essay on anxiety and depression. It might blend in. Now, if this is something that you feel like is really important as part of your application because you've done stuff about it and you've learned stuff, you can put that in your additional information section, which is an open 650-word section. And you can say, here's a challenge I faced, here's how it impacted me, here's what I did, and here's what I learned in bullet points. And they will get that part of you, which is great. Or you can weave it into a paragraph potentially in your essay. But one thing that's I think sometimes admission readers are concerned about is the student, in the student disclosing this, are we going as a college, are we going to be able to support this student? Is this student ready for college? Which is just a great question anyway to be thinking about. But sometimes people are like, is there a negative stigma attached? It depends on how you write about it. And if you're really committed to writing about it and you feel like it's your best story, first of all, I would ask, have you brainstormed other possibilities? Because it could be that you don't have other ideas just yet. So I would encourage students to brainstorm other possibilities. and I can share a link in the show notes to how to brainstorm 7 different ideas. But if you brainstorm other ideas and you spend at least an hour doing that, and you go, you know what, this story is my most important story, then I would say I would encourage students to put it into the first 2 paragraphs, the challenge and the effects. Mostly in the middle, talk about what you've done about it, and make sure you include a paragraph, if not 2, on what you learned through the experience. It can be harder to write. It can be emotionally taxing to do this, which, by the way, side note, I think is really useful just in life. Like, go and write, or you can just go and write about it and then go, okay, do I want this to be my college essay or not? Or do I just want this to be like, have been a personal growth exercise? Or sometimes students will write the challenges, mental health or, depression, anxiety essay, and then they'll write another one. And then they'll go back, okay, and ask, which one of these is going to be the best way to demonstrate my skills, qualities, values, and interests?
Right.
So
I love the idea of, if you know what you want to write about, just set it aside for a second and come up with 6 other ideas.
Right.
Because there are 6 other ideas. There are more ideas. There isn't just one. So I think that's really powerful, because I could just imagine someone listening and saying, Ethan, you've talked about my most important moments in my life, the things that define me, and you've said don't write about those things.
Right.
And it's not that you're saying don't write about those things. You're saying it can be a part of what you're writing.
Right.
It could be an aspect of what you include, but the narrative, the storyline, doesn't need to be so predictable. Right? Would you say that's accurate?
It's 2 things. One, it's predictability, because oftentimes we know how that story ends, and it's hard in like a paragraph or 2 to like be like, I'm going to differentiate myself in this particular paragraph. And oftentimes the reader ends up skimming the first half or 2/3 of your essay because they're like, well, I've heard this story before. But the other thing that I'll say to students sometimes, Harlan, is like, hey, I'm just not sure that I feel like there's so much to you that's not coming through in this essay. So sometimes it's detaching ourselves from the piece of writing. And so my team and I will often say to students like, hey, we'll talk about it as an essay, as a thing that you are doing, not like who you are. And I think that kind of language, and I'm talking to parents now for a second, when you're giving feedback to students, speaking about it as an essay, as a piece of writing, a thing that a student did, I think is really important versus like who the student is, because those are very different things. Right. And so I want to encourage students to, when you're thinking about it, like, this story, it is who you are, but it's also not who you are. And a good zoom back question is like, is there more to me that's maybe not showing up on the page yet?
Okay. I want to get to the things that you should do, but I just had a really cool idea. I don't know if you've ever done this before, because parents are involved, and there's probably a lot of parents who will be listening. But have you ever challenged a parent? Like, this would be so cool, Ethan. I'd love to be part of this experiment where a student has to write their personal statement, but then as part of it, a parent writes their own.
Totally.
Writes theirs too. Like, because if a parent goes through that process as opposed to coaching or reviewing it, it's kind of like the person on the field versus the person on the sideline. But if a parent actually gets to go through that process in some aspect of their life, it's going to be cathartic. It'll be interesting and challenging and insightful.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that suggestion. I've made it like once or twice before, but it's something that I'm like, I should probably meme a little bit more, because I feel like oftentimes, if I'm honest, and let me reveal myself and be vulnerable. When I was helping my brother through this process, for example, after college, and I was helping him with his essays, like, I was totally, what do you call it? Like, vicariously living through him and quote unquote writing my personal statement through him. Like, here are the things that I think it should be. And so I think that oftentimes as parents, we're doing that. We're going like, I want to be doing this. And so that, I think, could help actually remove some of that. And
so do it. So write your personal statement, because it's kind of cool for us to have our own personal statement just in life. I mean, we're constantly changing those personal statements, but for each phase of our life, and understanding just how to construct that. Okay. So when it comes to the things to do, and I know we're just really touching the surface. And what I love about Ethan and College Essay Guy, often called CEG, stands for College Essay Guide. Ethan has these incredible resources that are free. Like, that's the thing I really just admire how many resources, like if a student can't participate for whatever reason in what you're offering, there's a place for them to find lists and resources and prompts. And then there's also this piece, and I want to make sure we get to what you need to do, where if somebody doesn't have the resources to pay for a class, does that mean that they can't be in it?
No, it's pay what you can. So we're big on access. We're big on making sure that students can participate no matter what financial background. So there's, all the courses that we offer, the ones we talked about, there's like a button that you can click and request a pay what you can spot. And that's a real offer. Like, I'd really rather students take the course and pay a few bucks than, or $0 if they need to. There is also a place where for students listening who can't afford one-on-one support, that we have, basically a huge volunteer team where we pair students with a volunteer counselor if that's helpful for the essay and application process. So yeah. And then in terms of like resources, there are two, like we can get to, I can mention this again at the end, but like signing up for basically opting in for anything on the website will give you sort of like our top resources, and you'll just get like a spaced out series of emails where you'll get those different resources. So,
Yeah. Well, I really encourage anyone to do that. And I'm doing it because I have kids who are, it's crazy, man. I got kids who are like going through this now.
it's so wild.
And yeah, I mean, it's very scary. It's hard to know where to start. And I think as a parent wanting to coach your kid, wanting to help your kid, it's really hard. Even when it comes to like writing their personal statement, writing their supplemental essays. When it comes to things to do, when it comes to good places to start, if someone listening wants to just kind of, just think about this while playing a sport or going for a walk or just living their life, what are some things they can start thinking about?
Yeah, great. So if we're talking just like thinking about what do you want to show to colleges, starting with this 5-minute values exercise, which is basically I walk you through in this YouTube video to think about, okay, what are my top 10 values? What are my top 5? What are my top 3? And that's a cool way of being like, all right, like, what do I care about right now in my life? Is it my creativity, my, commitment to social justice? Is it efficiency? Is it, what is that? What are those things? Because that will start getting you thinking about the different parts of you that can map out into different parts of the application. But of course, you can't just, for example, write a personal statement about like, I love creativity and family and the environment. And that's me. Like, you've got to find specific concrete ways to show how those manifest in your life. So there's a little exercise that we'll link below. That's a brainstorming exercise, and it takes about 20 minutes or so, but it walks you through 7 different ways of thinking about different sides of you. And it's some of those, like I mentioned at the start, those great questions. I think it's a series of some of the most efficient questions, or let me say most effective questions for getting deep and then also going wide and thinking about different sides of yourself. And once you start to do that, your brain is going to start to like percolate on like, okay, cool, there are lots of sides of me that I could show. A simple exercise, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but a simple exercise for figuring out, is an idea, like a personal statement idea, going to work? And I'll show this because I have one sitting next to me, is picking something that you, for example, know a lot about. Like, I know a lot about games. And so you can take an idea like games and you can write it at the top of a piece of paper and then going, okay, how many different values could I connect games to? So I could connect, notice the board games behind me if folks are watching the YouTube version of this, but I love board games. For me, what values does it connect to? Well, it connects to some of my core values, some of the ones I just mentioned, like family and creativity. And I could connect board games to social justice or listening, because board games have made me a better listener. What this starts to lead to is like, when I start to think of examples of how board games have helped me connect with my family more deeply, or have helped, me express my creativity, like suddenly paragraphs and like images start to form. And each of these can end up becoming a paragraph in an essay. And the quick topic test is like, if I come up with an idea and I can connect it to different values in like a minute or two, and I call this a jellyfish. So you can create like a little jellyfish for yourself. That's a pretty good way of knowing if you're going to have a lot of some stuff to say about it. And if it's going to be what I call elastic, which is to say stretchy enough to connect to different sides of you. So for students who are thinking about it, or parents, if you're thinking about this, if you just, watch the video, brainstorm some different ideas based on this, and then go, okay, let's give it the jellyfish test. Can I connect it to different values, different sides of me that are important? That might be a good sign that this is something to explore, either for your personal statement or for, another part of your application. And it's fun. It takes less than half an hour, and it'll kind of get you building some momentum. Because I think that's something that's really important for this process, is getting inspired. and getting creative and having some stuff to do. So that's something like specific and concrete that you can do that will kind of create some energy for all the other stuff that you'll have to do throughout this process.
Okay, so what I'm thinking is there's someone who's a musician, they love music, or they're an athlete, and on the top of that jellyfish is baseball or band. And then they see all those little lines, but then they're thinking, well, Ethan said I shouldn't talk about athletics and I shouldn't talk about band. Is there a way to make a jellyfish that can incorporate those things that really excite you, that connect to those core values, and then a way to write that so it stands out?
Totally. So just like we were talking about with challenges or mental health, issues, anxiety, depression, I don't think you shouldn't talk about those things. I just think that if you make it your main topic, it's probably going to blend in. So ask yourself, how could baseball, the violin, one of these things that as a topic on its own might blend in, how could it become something that you weave into a particular paragraph? So an example of this, one of the brainstorming exercises asks you to think about your different identities. So some of my different identities include, and you make a big list of them. Well, ask yourself, okay, which of my identities is like my athlete identity or my musician identity? And what are some of the components and the values of that? That would be a way to potentially weave in that in a larger essay about different identities and how those manifest in your life. So I'm not saying no to that as in general, I'm just asking students to weave it in. The second technique, if you are needing to write an essay on one of those more common topics, is to brainstorm what are going to be the cliche values, which is to say, maybe they ask you, what's your most important extracurricular activity? And it's playing the violin. What are going to be the most common values? Brainstorm those: discipline, hard work, perseverance, and then cross those out mentally and see if you can find different values that another student might not be writing about. I call those making uncommon connections, because it's those uncommon connections like, well, violin has actually helped me become more productive, or violin has helped me, connect more deeply with my culture. And talking about those different values in those paragraphs are going to help you stand out. I like to say better ingredients, better pizza. I made that up, Harlan.
Yeah.
But it's those ingredients. And by ingredients, I mean the values that can make for more interesting paragraphs if you are going to write about one of those common topics.
So if it's music, it could be a string that breaks, and going to a store and meeting someone who's been playing their whole life and shares a life lesson that resonates.
I find that it's hard. Well, potentially, I find that it's hard. It ends up being hard to write about experiences with other people, or because sometimes it ends up being more about that other person or that story, and the story ends up taking a lot of it. If you did have a life-changing experience, for example, in a string breaking, I would go, what other objects have led to moments of insight in your life? So, for example, there was the string that broke on my violin, which led to that awesome conversation. And then I would have the student brainstorm 5 to 7 more. Can you think of what I call essence objects that led to these little moments, or these conversations with strangers that ended up having an impact? So maybe the theme of your essay becomes like objects that have been meaningful to me, or conversations with strangers. And that larger theme can basically become, the sort of connective thing that connects these different moments.
And it's a little bit of improv of like, yes, anding, totally, and going down that path. I'm going to wrap things up in just a moment, but I know there are a lot of students who are really shy. And when it comes to writing, it's very sensitive. A lot of students think they're terrible writers, and they're not great communicators, and they're not smart enough. So when you're going through this, when you're going through the essay course, how do you find students communicate? Is it a comfortable environment? Are they able to be vulnerable? How does that work?
Well, what's great about, and so there's like the course, and then there's like, sometimes we work with students one-on-one. There's like, the great thing about the exercise is that they're all written, and their students get to decide what level of share they want to do. So, a lot of times the workshop is happening in here. I'm pointing to my brain right now. It's happening in your head, and it's happening in your heart, I would say. And so, we're working to create an environment of psychological safety where students get to consent to sharing. So, for example, if I'm on the course and I'm like, here's some ideas, and I want to hear your ideas, share out your topics, because we'll play a game called like, is this a good topic or not? And I think that, question, is this a good topic or not? For some students, it's like, oh, I want to know right away. And they'll share their ideas. Other students. And so what I try and provide is frameworks so that students can search themselves and find out, do I think this is going to be a good topic or not, based on what what a good topic is, quote unquote. So I'm trying to provide frameworks so that students can, one, share only when they want to, but two, decide for themselves. And then, yeah, when it comes to like, working with students one-on-one, for example, it's like working with somebody, a caring coach who's going to actually, kind of go through this process at the student's pace. And part of that is figuring out to what extent do students want to share, to what extent are they ready to, reveal and to go slow.
Well, you've been doing this for a long time, and there's a method to this, right? There's a method. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. Where do you start? How do you work through this? How do you get to a place where you can share something that really represents? I think it's like sharing light. I like to look at it as light. Like right now, what we're doing is sharing light and energy and sound waves, and it really is a way to capture their light. And I think that what you're talking about, the prompts and all the other aspects, not only do they help students to be able to articulate something that they probably didn't know they had inside them, they're able to use those skills to communicate in lots of different ways. I want to get, were you going to say something? I don't want to jump on.
No, that's my hope. I mean, I think that I wouldn't be doing this work if it was just about getting into college. Like, higher education is awesome. And I hope sincerely that, the students that I meet and the students listening to this get into great schools. But what I'm deeply committed to is finding these ways to learn more about ourselves and one another and ways to connect with one another, because that's the stuff that's going to carry out much beyond this process.
Okay. I want to share all the resources you have. I want to go through a list of just maybe like 3 essential resources. But before that, there's one other question that popped into my head.
Great.
And I want to know, Ethan, your top 3, and it could be just from this past year, 3 memorable essays, 3 topics that really resonated, that you were like, man, these are really good ones. Can you give me 3, and I'll take as many as 5?
Great. The first one that I already mentioned, it was a student writing about their different identities. I am Mexican, I am Chinese, I am Catholic, and each paragraph focused with specific detail on how that identity manifested in their lives. Number 1, that's in my head right now. Number 2, another student wrote about the different homes, which is to say the places where they found themselves in flow, where time disappeared. And again, specific details, moments, images that in each paragraph showed a different home, a place that they loved. Notice that none of these, I'm trying to do this on purpose, none of these necessarily relate to challenges. Another one, I'm also trying to, here's another one. Student writing about food. I have a YouTube video on this one, but there's a student writing about how different food experiences have impacted him in different ways, connecting to family, connecting to, in some cases, vulnerability. And food is a common topic, but I think he did a really nice job of taking a common topic and making it uncommon by getting, again, really specific with those detailed moments and images, and having a so what at the end that really surprised me. Here's a bonus one that I don't necessarily recommend, but there was a student that my coach and I were meeting with, and we were talking about ideas, and she mentioned the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, which is like basically a fake dictionary that has made up words, and these different like words that there should be things that there should be words for, but they make up the word and the definition. And this student, we recognize that this would be a pretty good montage thread. So a montage is like an essay that jumps around in space and time. So the student ended up writing an essay about how making up these different words and what they meant, and each one showed a different aspect for that student's life. So that's a great example of finding a thing that connects to a bunch of different things. Like one student wrote about Trivial Pursuit, and each category represented a different side of her. So it's finding those things that, again, are elastic and allow you to talk about different sides of yourself. You can see that I'm a super fan of. That's the theme that all of those essay topics have in common.
And I assume some of those students are going to college.
They're all going to great schools. And, some of those students are going to selective schools, but again, I want to come back to like, there's a great college out there for you that wants you and that even will give you money. So
yeah,
it's really a matter of research.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. I love talking to you. I find it so interesting. There's so many ideas and questions that swirl around my mind. And I would love for everyone to know, where can they go? How can they take these ideas, put them into a essay? How can they learn from you and the rest of your team?
Great. We'll go students, parents, counselors. So students who are thinking about this process, there's a free guide to the personal statement. You can find it on the website. And if you opt in for that, you'll get basically this like step-by-step guide that kind of walks you through the light version of the course. And it's got sample essays, it's got brainstorming, et cetera. For parents, we've got what we call our family handbook, which is essentially we try to keep it to 35 pages. So it's not a whole book, but it's like the 35-page version of like all the things to think about when it comes to the college admission process. And that's on our collegeessayguide.com/parents page. For counselors, I have like my top 10 resources for counselors. Things like, our YouTube channel, things like the workshops that we do. There's PD that we do. We also do anyway. So I would say that would be the place for counselors to go.
That's awesome. So I'm going to link to all of these resources in the show notes. So people can click on this. They can learn about your YouTube channel and your different videos and the prompts. And hey, for people who want to find a date, what are those interesting questions again? Like how many are there?
If you Google interesting questions, college essay guy, it'll come up on the Google machine.
Okay, it's not even just dating. Just meet someone, make friends, maybe a friend, who knows? But I'll include that as well. And then if people want to find your book, will you tell them again the books?
College Essay Essentials and College Admission Essentials. Available wherever fine books are sold.
Okay, that's great. And I'll figure maybe I'll give some away.
Great.
Just figure out how to do that too, because I like giving things away, which is great. If anyone has questions about Ethan, what Ethan has shared, you can let me know. I'd love to have Ethan on again. We go way back and we can get deeper into the specifics. For today, I really wanted to just start, a starting point, because I think that's really the hardest part, is just starting. So Ethan, I'm so grateful. Thanks for your time. And is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap things up?
Yeah, it's like a sort of guiding principle for this process is like something like the Serenity Prayer, which is like focus on the things you can control, is basically the gist of it. It's like, give me the wisdom to know what I can and can't control. And I just want to encourage students, like, if you're getting stressed about this, ask yourself, what is it that I can control right now? What is it that I can control? You can't control necessarily where you get in. You can't control what admission readers are going to think of you. You can control, do you make time to work on your stuff? And are you applying to schools, for example, that you have a good chance of getting into? So refocus and keep asking, what is it that I can control, that I can focus on right now? I found that's a pretty good way of dealing with my own anxiety. So
yeah,
for that.
I love it. I love it because we do have a lot more control over this process, and people are going to live wonderful lives and do incredible things. And school is just a place to go to do the things that you love to do. And there are lots of places to do it, or to learn and experiment and experience and all that. So I'm so grateful to have you in our corner, in students' corners, parents' corners, professionals' corner, and we corners. And I will continue to share your resources. So Ethan, thank you so much for being here. Always grateful. Love to see you. Can't wait to see you again in person. And thanks for your time.
Thanks for being awesome, Harlan. As always, it's lovely to talk to you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Harlan Cohen, and whatever you need, however I can help you, the goal is to help everyone to get to wherever they want to go by scaling hope, giving everyone something to be excited about. So thanks for being here, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, everyone.